my parents were getting a divorce, there was a time where they handed me off to my uncle in Ohio for a few weeks. He lived himself in a country and had previously been somewhat estranged from the family. The first thing I noticed as his house, the first thing anyone would notice was that all the hunting trophies, they were made by me when I was nervous and alone in the house, which commonly during my stay, as my uncle would go out to do his business, get drunk. He would leave me alone for the house for hours, sometimes days at a time. I was 6 years old at the time, but I was able to raid the fridge and certain, as well as enough, my uncle had two major rules: don't leave the house and don't let the cat out. He had a cat that lived in the basement and he never let me see it, but he went down to the basement to feed it every few days. I was never to enter the basement, let alone play with the cat. I spent much of my time playing alone with this Yorkie one evening. While he was out at the bar, I decided it wouldn't hurt just to take one look at the cat. My uncle always kept the door to the basement locked, but he must have thought that, as a 6-year-old, I wouldn't be observant enough to remember that he kept a key or intelligent enough to use it. He didn't even bother to take a place high for me to reach. Having retrieved the key and opened the door, I stared down an unlit stairway. I became afraid my uncle would find out and get mad, so I hesitated to venture down. It was storming outside, and it was just when the power went out. I was immediately frightened, this being my first power outage in memory, let alone first power outage by myself. I had found my way into the guest bedroom, hiding under some covers. Perhaps a half an hour later, I realized that my uncle would come home drunk any time and wouldn't be happy if he found the basement door open. I braved for the darkness and went to lock the closet door, making sure to returning the key to its hiding place. The storm was over, and the moonlight illuminated in the house through the windows, but the power was still out, and its still mounted deer heads were really creeping me out, as well as making my timidly back to the guest room. I heard something that rocked my body with shivers, a simple feline growl, like a regular cat growl, only just a bit deeper and louder. I was not afraid of cats, but something about this growl made me terrified. Logically, I should have worried about my uncle would do if he found out I let the cat out, but something about this growl just seemed wrong. It took me a few moments to look around, and when I did, my gaze was met with the biggest cat I've ever seen. My biggest cat, I am including in my 6-year-old mind, was a concept of the cat, a house cat. Not lions or tigers at the zoo, which weren't really cats to me. The cat was the size of a German Shepherd, and I would lean over years later at this particular cat was a Eurasian lynx, but at the same time it just looked massively oversized house cat, which perhaps it was somehow made it more terrifying than it had ever been a lion. The most terrifying thing besides the creature's size was the fact that it was posed in the recognizable pounce position. I sidestepped in time just to avoid the pounce. It could have been turned out much worse if I had made the mistake of turning around to run. The cat did ran down the hall and took a moment to rebound. That just gave me enough time to make a dash for the bathroom and locked myself in. There was a scratching and clawing at the bathroom door, and I considered hiding in the shower for extra measure. But I was too scared to move. After a few seconds, the noises stopped. I sat there on top of the toilet for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably more than 10 minutes. The power was still out, and my claustrophobia was getting to me. I eventually had to get out of there. I opened the door for a crack and peeked out, and then I opened it some more. The only source of light was still the moon, but it was enough for the coast to look clear. I crept slowly, ever so slowly, to the kitchen, picked up the telephone, only to find out that the storm had knocked that out too. There were 2 doors leading to outside, but my uncle was serious about not leaving the house. They could only be unlocked with his key, which he kept with him when he went out. I didn't want to risk opening or breaking a window, or fear of attracting the cat's attention, whatever it was at the moment. I decided to make its way down to the stairs to the 2nd story. This meant risking stumbling in the dark and encountering the cat again. As I made my way into the living room, I left the kitchen area and decided to crawl my way back upstairs. As I was exiting out of the bathroom hallway into the living room, my eyes caught in motion. I saw the faintly glowing eyes of the cat, although they were not looking directly at me, and as its eyes were adjusted to increase the darkness of the windowless living room, a more detailed fade in, just staring at the silhouette of the lynx until I could make out its fur pattern. The cat was prowling, stalking in a way that told me it might have been sensitive in my presence, but I hadn't locked into my location yet. And the scariest part was just how silently, completely silently, it was moving. Its massive paws made no sound at all on the living room carpet. Suddenly the cat pounced again, but this time it wasn't at me. I looked and startled in silence. I realized it had lurched upon a taxidermy there. Frustrated, realizing that the prey had no meat after chewing, the cat growled and leaped onto the sofa. It licked its paws, stretched and curled up into a sleeping position. I decided it wasn't worth taking the risk traversing into the living room to get downstairs, and started crawling back to the kitchen. Not wanting to lock myself in the bathroom again due to my fear of small spaces, but still wanting secure refuge, I decided that I'd compromise by hiding under the dining room table. As I crawled under the table from the kitchen, I smelled something that made me wrench a little. Then I saw it, the bloodied remains of a Yorkie, the dog that I had forgotten about all of this terror. The dog was all shredded up into a meat pile near an air vent. I didn't feel bad for the dog, I just felt more terrified now than ever. I decided to put up with the stench and crawl between the dining room chairs under the table. I wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but I would now be more physically compromised if the cat found me. But the chairs and the tablecloth seemed to provide enough cover. I somehow fell asleep under the table, although probably for a few minutes, until I woke up and it was still night and the power was still out. The fact that I fell asleep made me more invulnerable in this spot, but I tried for the stairs again. When I reached it for the second time, the cat wasn't there, but it did leave evidence of its presence, having torn the sofa, reclining the chair upholstery into shreds. They imitated me enough once again to head back to the dining room. When I got back, I realized the cat was lying on the dining room table. It probably had been there since I woke up. I decided that meant the coast was finally clear again to go downstairs, but just when the power came back on, the lynx sat bolt upright, knocking over a vase and breaking it. And then it found me on its hands and knees and started growling. I let out a scream as it pounced. Although I heard a gunshot and the cat did not finish its pounce, it was dead by the time it landed on me. It had been a mistake, me believing my uncle had gone to the bar that night, when he really had been sleeping off a bottle of whiskey upstairs. When he heard the vase break, he knew there was an intruder, and he grabbed his revolver. He pulled the carcass off of me, and I sobbed. He hugged me and kissed my forehead. I was expecting him to be angry at me for letting the cat out, but for the rest of my stay, he seemed to feel nothing but guilt over the fact that it was almost mauled. He then stopped going out until my parents took me back from him. The family fell out of touch with him after the next few years. I never heard from my uncle again. I have my own cat now, and while I love her to death, I can't help but get nervous around her whenever the power does go out. Well, that was another creepypasta written by Hopeless Night Owl, and that was Don't Let the Cat Out. This is a really interesting story, having, the uncle of the protagonist in this story, keep a lynx as a pet in the basement. I mean, like, that was actually quite freaky because, keeping a wild animal as a pet is not a good idea. Because if you keep a wild animal as a pet and your parents tell you not to bring wild animals in or whatever, then, something like that could happen. The cat or any kind of wild animal you bring in the house could come out and start trying to eat you in the house or family members or whatever. It's just messed up in all due honesty. But it's still a pretty good story. I mean, Hopeless Night Owl did a great job with this story. And I mean, this is another Hopeless Night Owl story I got to, touch. Besides the lion one, the Jack the Lion creepypasta, and the which one was it? Oh yeah, the lost episodes can be found again. That one was pretty good. So, this story was definitely a good one. I definitely like the grammar, sentence structuring, and everything else. This one actually gives me second thoughts on, if I were to keep a wild animal in the house. Yeah, could be the consequences of what could happen. So, yeah, I probably just don't want to involve, myself getting hurt, with this creature or whatever. So, I guess with that being the case, so that being said, I personally really liked this story. I thought it was a good one, and Hopeless Night Owl did an awesome job. So I gotta give props to Hopeless Night Owl for being this. So that I can definitely say was definitely a pretty good story. So I guess with that being the case, and with that being said, I'm gonna sit here and say right now that this is just simply my own personal opinion. And if you happen to disagree with me, that's perfectly fine too, as we're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these stories and creepypastas. This is just my own personal thoughts. I want to give a good shout out to Hopeless Night Owl for writing this story. This story was definitely a good one. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. Definitely well made. It's a pretty good story. So, anyways, I guess with that being the case and that being said, um, it's a good story. I will leave a link in the description down below for any of you guys who are interested in checking this out. And as I'm always going to say is I'm the Lion Queen. I want to thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you're new to my channel, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications when I upload. Also, don't forget to follow my other media such as DeviantArt, Discord, and even Twitter. And be sure to subscribe and support my backup channel known as Miss Dark Shigo. And before I end this off, I want to say I do have a theory as to why the lynx was being downstairs. I think the uncle was just keeping it as a pet, just to try and hide it. But unfortunately, the secret was spilt the beans out eventually. So, yeah, I guess the uncle probably learned his lesson on that path. But we really don't know why he took the lynx in the house or kept it in the basement. So, yeah, anyone who has theories as to why that's the case, feel free to let me know what they are in the comments below. And as always, I'm going to sit here and say, feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.